Hey everybody, welcome to the Ethicsverse, the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. We got a real treat for you today. I know I said that last week, but I really mean it this time. We are talking about mastering the numbers, dominating data analytics. Data analytics is a hot topic right now. It's something that a lot of us wish we were a little bit better at, so we're going to be diving deep on that. Couple of brief announcements. As I'm doing my announcements like we do every single week, please drop into the chat where you're dialing in from, and also drop your LinkedIn URL. Our industry is very collegial. You know, it's like one of our greatest assets, and I always am pushing everybody to take advantage of that. So I guarantee whatever you're going through right now, whatever you're struggling with, there's somebody on this webinar today that probably has an answer for you, and it's just on you to reach out and get some of that help. So drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat. I encourage you to connect with at least one person, because your network is your net worth. Neither are big enough. Here is the Ethico link tree. So if you have not followed us everywhere, what's the matter with you? Hit the link tree and you can follow us on YouTube. You can follow us on LinkedIn. You can follow me on LinkedIn if you like. Each week or each day, I guess, we are posting all of our best clips from our world famous podcast, The Ethics Experts, our world famous webinar series, The Ethicsverse. So go ahead and click us on there, and you can follow us everywhere we are. Today, as always, world famous Ethicsverse book giveaway. We're giving away Christy Grant Hart's brand new book, Your Year as a Wildly Effective Compliance Officer. This book is flying off the shelves. Amazon is their website shut down last week because so many people were ordering this. So if you have not checked this out yet, get active in the chat, ask some great questions, because guess what? We're giving away 10. Holiday is in the air. This is the season of giving, so we're doubling our giveaways today. We're giving away 10 of these babies. A couple of other books I'll get to in a second. If you'd like a custom benchmark report before the end of the year, drop a 1 into the chat or contact whoever invited you here, and we'd be happy to take some of your data, put it into a nice presentation full of tips, full of comparisons to the status quo benchmark, the Ethico benchmark. We even have one for healthcare, the only industry benchmark for healthcare in the industry. So if you're interested in that, happy to put that together for you. That is free for Ethico clients and also free for Ethicsverse members. By the way, last week, we broke a record last week with reactions. Okay, so last week we had over 1,800 reactions. Let's hope that today we're giving away so many tips we blow past that 2,000 reaction mark. Okay, we feed off of these because it's early. I haven't had lunch yet, haven't had breakfast. I need something to satiate me through this hour. Okay. Ethico's ecosystem. Somebody asked us recently, why is our ecosystem different? What's better about it? Briefly, I think it kind of comes down to 3 different factors. The first factor is we poured a bunch of money into the tool and a bunch of insights from people on the front lines. So this is a next-gen tool that's going to integrate with things for you and take away some of that busy work. We have a commitment to quality here. Our company was built by compliance officers for compliance officers, and you can see those fingerprints throughout everything. And finally, we're committed to service. We have this old school mentality where we put the client first, and the confluence of those 3 things, we hope, helps folks crowdsource more risk intelligence at scale, and helps us to broaden our impact within our organization. If you're looking for some last minute stocking stuffers, or if you just want to treat yourself, here's a couple of other books that have come out recently. The Champions Network by Matt Silverman. This book is phenomenal. Check the Amazon reviews if you don't believe me. Great book about building a network and being more impactful. Of course, our friend Adam Balfour's book, Ethics and Compliance for Humans, an Ethics and Compliance bestseller. Check that one out as well. This book is chock full of phenomenal tips to improve your program and humanize it a little bit more. Of course, Tom Fox's book. This is great for your kids or your grandkids, your nieces and nephews, so that they can see what you do, but more importantly, learn to speak up. So check that book out. This is one of Tom's best-selling books. It's a phenomenal series. So check that one out. And finally, of course, a round of applause for our good friend, international bestseller, Mary Shirley, with her book, 65 Hacks and Cheat Codes to Level Up Your Compliance Program. So check those books out. We are offering 1 year of free service because we love you. And it's not just because it's Christmas. The biggest competitor for Ethico right now is inertia. People are always nervous to make that change, and to change houses seems like a lot of risk. How do you thread that needle? So what we've done is we've put our best foot forward, tried to build that bridge, and we're going to be giving away a year free for the rest of the quarter for anybody who books a demo or anybody who wants to check this out. So if you're thinking about making a change next year, it might make sense to reach out to us, see what our tool's all about, see what I'm talking about every single week, and take advantage of that free year. Next week, we have Leah Maroney, one of my old friends. She is a clinical psychologist, and we're going to be talking about fostering healthy engagement in the workplace. You know, back in the Industrial Revolution, there was a ton of time and a ton of money spent all the time on preventative maintenance on the machinery. Why don't we have the equivalent for that in our knowledge work economy, where the humans are our assets, right? We're going to be talking about some easy tips, some easy tactics to reframe and change our mindset with respect to how we interact with our team, how we interact with our broader organization, to build those healthy workplaces and get more engagement from our workforce. And then after that, we're doing ESG audits, too good to be real or a golden opportunity. So that's what's coming up. With this, I'm going to pass this over to the one and only coolest guy in compliance. Round of applause for my man, Matt Kelly. There you go, partner.
Thank you very much, Nick. And thank you, everybody, for joining us here today. This should be a great session as usual. So we are here today to talk about data analytics, near and dear to the heart of a lot of compliance professionals, including a lot of the regulators who talk about the importance of data analytics, and compliance officers who do want to understand how to get a good analytics capability up and running. So we have a lot of ground we want to cover here today, and we have two great speakers in addition to Nick about that. First is Haley Tuzeski. Haley is with Cisco Systems these days in their ethics and compliance function. Haley, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for the welcome.
And also joining us all the way from Switzerland, and we are delighted to have another European perspective on these webinars, is Elia Vasil. And Elia is with JTI, which is Japanese or Japan Tobacco. But Elia, thank you for joining us too. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So we are going to cover a lot here for everybody who's listening.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Matt. First of all, nobody talked about my cowboy hat, but we can get back to that. Not that important. I didn't realize that you were on the cover of CEP magazine, Matt. Round of applause for Matt. Yeah. My guy, this is amazing, dude.
I am on the cover of the new SCCE magazine that's just hitting the mailboxes this week, I think. I don't know. But yeah, that was a real treat.
And I'm sorry, I forgot to dive. Go ahead. I'm sorry, buddy. I was on a little lag. Go ahead. What were you saying?
I was just going to go through our agenda here for the listeners. We want to cover a couple of different big points. We're going to talk about where you can find useful data in your company, because most of the time the data that you want is out there somewhere. You just need to figure out, how am I going to get it? How am I going to analyze it? Some about the challenges of how you would actually do analytics. Do you need great whiz-bang technology? I would say probably not. But how do you collect lots of different types of data, distill it all down into some useful insight that you can use yourself, you can report to the board, you can show it off to regulators or whoever else needs it, and then how to be able to actually capitalize on these insights. Because once you see something from your data analytics, you cannot unknow that fact, that issue, that weakness. So you're going to have to change your program or your approach to a certain risk. How do you figure that out? That's what we're looking to do. And as always, we love to have comments from the listeners. So if there is anything that you have a question about, you want to make a comment, pop it right into the chat that we have running, and we're happy to tackle that as soon as we can. I wanted to get started with just sort of a generalized question. I'll ask Haley first, and then Elia, and then Nick. Like, what do you think is the biggest thing or the most difficult thing to get right or to understand about data analytics? Or what's the biggest mistake you would see compliance officers slip into? If we just want to cast a wide net like that, Haley, what are your thoughts first?
I think first and foremost is thinking that you have to go it alone or that it doesn't already exist. So I have been pleasantly surprised that by taking a risk focused or a business process focused approach, you can actually often find analytics that are happening elsewhere around the company that you can leverage. So really reaching out to your network across the second line of defense to see what others are already doing and leveraging those efforts and maybe complementing them or enhancing them in some ways can be the greatest challenge in some respects, but also ultimately can save you the greatest amount of time and be the most economical and effective for the company.
All right. And Elia, what do you think?
Well, building on that, I think starting is the challenge because there's no really a great example that you could take and be like, oh, I could copy what this company did. So in a way, we're kind of learning to fly the plane as we build it. But more specifically, I think there's 4 points that I would address here is one is access to data. So there's data that compliance owns, but oftentimes we need data that other functions own. So how do you get that data? Then we've got like the complexity of the IT landscape across the company. And related to that are the company resources, the different ERP tools, T&E, et cetera, and how do those systems communicate to one another. And I think the fourth one would be budget and the decision whether to do something in-house or externally. Those would be my 4 main points.
All right. And Nick, so far we've had lots of talk about this is already going on or the resources are already there if you just know how to pluck them out and pull them together. But what do you think are some of the bigger challenges of getting a good data analytics capability up and running?
I think like with data analytics in general, I just think it can easily turn into a mountain that seems like insurmountable. You know what I'm saying? It can seem like this massive problem, and it can seem like there's all this data and you don't really know where to get started. And I think kind of the rule of thumb with data analytics is that 80% right is right, and doing something just to get going is going to start to give you some conclusions that you can or it'll give you some things to kind of investigate further. You can always get lost in anecdotes. You can always get lost in the minutia, but I would say don't let that prevent you from diving in and starting to kind of whittle away at this mountain of data that you want to start to draw some conclusions from.
I have heard that a lot from people that they think data analytics is this big thing that you buy a complete set of it and it's turned on and it's ready to go, and you're not starting incrementally, and so you get daunted by it. I've heard that an awful lot. I don't think that's true at all. I do think that you can start very small, and it doesn't need to be daunting, even for compliance officers who I know they don't teach data management at compliance officer school. It's typically compliance officers or lawyers, but there's no real reason not to get started on this. Let me take even a step back further. Before you even go searching around for data or analytics that might be happening elsewhere in the enterprise that would be useful. Haley, let me start with you about how do you look at your compliance risks and say, okay, I have these risks here. Therefore, I need to get this sort of data and go out and find it somewhere. I'm trying to get a sense of how you draw the line between what my risks are to therefore this is the type of data I want to try to track. Is that easy to do in your experience, or how do you figure it out?
I mean, it can be, but it can also be really challenging. So I think maybe even taking a step back before that, particularly since the focus has so much become how do I know that my program is working effectively, or how do I know that my risk is well managed? Sometimes you really want to actually start with your compliance program map or your strategy or your internal controls matrix, whatever your sort of document is that kind of memorializes how it is from a programmatic perspective you're managing all your risks. And then match that up with what is already being monitored and tested in some way to then identify the opportunities where analytics could be most helpful. And so you start almost by narrowing your universe of what it is that you're going to start focusing on from an analytics perspective. And then you really have to focus on the underlying business processes. So if you're monitoring or you're going to use analytics in relation to your compliance tools, very easy. You typically own that data. But often even those tools rely on data lakes that are sourced from other parts of the company, whether it's your travel and expense system, whether it's coming from your financial systems and your procurement systems. So you're getting the flows of your third-party relationships, and reach out to your contacts within those organizations to understand the data lakes that are available, what the limitations might be. Oftentimes, companies run on multiple ERPs where you have different systems for procurement, depending on either different parts of the company, maybe different countries in which you're operating. So really go to the data owner and just have those conversations before you even start thinking about how you might leverage the data or make different data sets talk to each other. So you know what the limitations and the complexities might be up front, and you can plan appropriately from a resources perspective and a cost perspective before you even dig in.
Elliot, give me your thoughts on the same issue there about how you go from the set of risks I have to the sets of data I want to collect. Or I don't know if you maybe have one or two good examples of what that might look like, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, as much as I believe that anything in compliance should start with risk assessment, when it comes to data analytics, I think you want to start with the data that you already have and kind of see the story that tells and what risks then you can mitigate with that, because hopefully you already have something in place to mitigate risks already, so you're not banking on introducing data analytics. But I would think some of the sources that compliance already owns, like the case management system, the learning management system, where all the training goes into. Maybe there's some platforms where people disclose conflicts of interest, give some entertainment. Maybe there's like ethics and integrity surveys that you can get results from, and that's already a lot of data. And I would think what the data says, how come it makes sense. In other words, behind the data, there's a story. And so I think what you're trying to do is like get to the story behind the data and use it in your discussions with management, and try and take that opportunity to turn the data into action.
And Nick, here's a question I want to put to you based on a couple of comments I saw from some of the listeners. Several people talking about a big challenge is simply access to the data. Either the IT department is already overworked and they don't want to bother with this compliance person knocking on the door, or there's disagreement about who wants to share the data, or maybe there's international data, it's very difficult to get it. But a lot of that gets back to what we talk about a lot on this EthicsVerse series about the compliance officer doesn't really have the heft to be able to go to the rest of the enterprise and say, you have to work with me, or I'm trying to help you, or this is for the benefit of the company. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about how even here on data analytics, it's still kind of coming back to, is the company serious about putting its shoulder behind a good compliance program or not?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, most organizations, at least at like the top level, would say that they want to support our function, right? They would say that it's important that folks get the data they need and so forth. When it comes down to it, though, there's some persuasion, there's some influence that's necessary if there's not like a formal shoulder behind that push by the compliance officer, right? So I think this is going to sound stupid, perhaps, but buckle up. This is still early. We're only 15 minutes in, so there's probably going to be a bunch more of these. But simply asking a what or a how question to somebody that you need to do something for you is an entirely different persuasion track than saying, I need this, give me this thing. You have to do it because it's demanded of you. A how or a what question reframes your problem into a you plural problem. It's our problem now. So saying something, instead of saying, I need this data, please give it to me, saying something like, how can I get this data? Or I'm trying to, confirm this hypothesis I have about something that's going on. How, what can we do to get that kind of data? I know that sounds simple, but that little reframe can change a request from something adversarial to something that's a lot more collaborative. The other thing I would say is that we have data all over the place. And again, it's easy to start kind of drowning in these data lakes. But like, if you think about it, like if it's raining outside, you can look in a couple of places to confirm that it's raining, right? You can look in the sky, you could see the clouds, you could look you could see that there's puddles, you could see raindrops in the puddles. And so many times the thing that we're trying to confirm with data, if it actually exists, it probably exists in a couple of different places. You might not need the full download from the entire HRIS system across the entire world in order to confirm the thing that you're talking about. So I think being a little bit thoughtful, understanding the concept of sample sizes, right? We don't need to run a statistical analysis on an entire population in order to draw, statistically valid conclusions. We can do that from a sample. So that concept allows for a lot more opportunities of places that we can find the data to draw those conclusions. And don't lose sight of the opportunity that, qualitative data can play in this whole thing. Doing a simple survey with folks on your team or other leaders in the organization around, I think X, Y, and Z is happening. What do you think might be the root cause for that? You might be able to crowdsource some ideas about what rocks you should look under to find the thing you're looking for, or whether the conclusion that you may have sort of temporarily landed on is even valid. So I think those are a couple of things that a couple of mindsets that we can utilize to help kind of open some of these up. Last point I'll make right now is, also don't forget about the 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule, or the Pareto principle, says that 80% of the output is driven by, 20% of the inputs, right? If you have 5 risk factors, probably one of those factors accounts for about 80% of your risk. So if you can use this Pareto mentality and understand that when we're talking about data analytics, it's an iterative, ongoing process to understand statistically what's going on in our organization by, as we said, finding that story in the data. If you can use that Pareto lens, it helps us to not get overwhelmed by this massive mountain, but rather focus our efforts on where we can likely find some conclusions.
So I want to ask a little bit more about the types of data we want to collect. And for compliance officers, I think there's a big pressure. There is a pressure from regulators. They have said, we want to know that you have an effective compliance program. So there's a difference between data that shows your compliance program is busy, because every compliance program is busy. We're all worked way too much and way too stretched. But that's not the same as data showing your compliance program is actually effective and it's working toward an end. And I was curious, what sort of data would you try to collect to show that the program is actually improving things or it's working the way it's intended? Not just that you're busy, because it kind of feels to me like you're going to have to track a couple of different dimensions of data and see how they interact, not just how much training have we done or how many third-party due diligence forms have we collected. Big deal. People might mail in the training form or lie on the due diligence. But Haley, let me start with you. How do you try and figure that out, that the types of data you want to study to make sure now I know my program has got forward motion? What would that look like?
It's a great question and actually connects directly to a couple of points that have been made in the chat, which is you can be data rich about what your program is doing or how well it's doing it, but you can still be information poor. And when it comes to being able to show that the program is effective, you need to start with the information. What is the question I am trying to answer very specifically? Am I trying to prove that the management commitment and our culture and tone at the top are effective? Am I trying to show that we have effectively managed our external expenditure activity, whether it's gifts, travel, entertainment? So be very specific about the question that you want to answer first. What do you want? What do you want to be able to show management, and then work backwards from there. Because you will, first of all, be able to really focus in on the precise data sets that you need in order to answer that question. but you'll also think creatively about what do the individual data sets that you're looking at actually show. And I have this conversation a lot with leaders in particular around hotline reporting numbers, where the instinct
what are
is,
they at?
if the number is high, oh, that's problematic. That means we have issues. From my perspective, if you have an above benchmark hotline reporting or speak up reporting rate, from all of your various intake methods, it's actually indicative of a very strong compliance culture, that you have employees who are comfortable speaking up, who are comfortable using official channels in order to ask questions, raise concerns, whether or not those concerns are valid, whether or not there might be some underlying misconduct. If people are talking, that's a good indicator of health, right? So you really, and I think when you do this, you actually need to look at each risk indicator, each data set, and think about really what does it show me? How meaningful is it? So I think the most important part of this process to avoid kind of that mountain and that overwhelming feeling is to identify a really narrow area that you want to look at and just focus on that in the first instance, whether it's your external expenditures or your culture or your people risks, and focus on 5, maybe 10 risk attributes of that part of your program, and then work from there.
Okay.
The way I kind of think about this. Oh, I'm sorry. But
go ahead, Nick. Go.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, I think we can look at this question from two different angles. I think from one angle, we can look at it internal, and the other angle, we can look at it external. From an internal perspective, we want the confirmation that our program is that we're making progress with our program, right? We want to make sure that our efforts are leading to positive results and our program is moving forward. We should be able to look at data to confirm that. Separately, and maybe relatedly, but at least separately, there's this external component as well, where it's our job to build our case, right? We need to build our case that our program is effective, because assuming that we're putting forth, earnest efforts to improve that program, we want to be able to kind of show that. And so a year ago, I gained a couple of lbs, okay? I was a little bit, everything was fitting a little bit tight. And so I tried to get in shape, and the scale was not moving, but I was seeing results other places. My clothes were fitting a little bit better. I wasn't getting out of breath. I could actually bend down and tie my shoes, okay? So my point is, there are multiple if something is improving, you're going to see that in multiple places. And I think part of our job, at least from that external perspective, is to be able to craft a story and tell a story using objective data points to reinforce and support the claim that our progress is or that our program is making that progress. There's a subtle difference between that internal and that external, but don't be scared to look at a secondary or tertiary, whatever, what I'm saying, third level impact of something, and incorporate that in your broader story. Because part of what we're doing, again, we need to balance that objective and subjective. We want to make sure that our efforts are actually improving our program, and we're focusing our resources in the right areas. But we also want to be able to bolster our external case, whether that's to the board or to the executives or to the DOJ, whatever, that our program is making progress. So those different intentionalities can lead us to look in different places to craft a different sort of data story.
So to that point, Nick, here's a great story from one of the listeners here, Debbie, who's talking about after 2 years, she noticed a decline in the hotline calls, actually because employees were feeling so comfortable to just swing by the compliance officer's office rather than place a call on the hotline. That strikes me as a very good thing. But
so then that's a slide, right? That's a slide you present. You say, 3 years ago, we had this many reports, and here was the mix of them. 80% were coming through the hotline, and 20% were coming directly to managers or directly to the compliance office. You can see that our reporting rate has increased, and now we've had a total shift in the proportion of who's going through the anonymous hotline and who's coming to our office directly. Boom, this is absolute evidence that our program is becoming more effective, and here's the data to support it. That loop is closed now. That case is made in my mind,
So, Elia, tell me what you're thinking about this.
Yeah, I was just going to share an example from a previous role where I had kind of my first real challenge. I was working in compliance training, and it was early in my career. But I was doing kind of regular meetings with risk owners, and I would share training statistics. So I'd be telling, Matt, this many people were trained on your topic, and this is kind of the geographical split of where training happened. And one of these risk owners asked me, hey, can you tell me where training didn't happen? So who didn't get trained? And also, are we training the right people? Are we missing any groups that we maybe should be training? So I took that question and thought, this is interesting. How can I help here? And all I had was training data. I had the names and I had the demographics associated with the people who were trained across the company globally. But I didn't have a listing of all employees to compare against to get those kind of insights. And I reached out to HR and I explained what I'm trying to get at. And they helped with like a full list of employees, which I took away. And with good old Excel, I worked out the delta between trained employees and total employees. So now I could present the data and have that conversation very differently. I could give people facts and figures, and the discussion kind of shifted. You're not just telling, measurements like 3,000 people got trained, which may sound overly positive. You're telling them 3,000 people out of 15,000 should have gotten trained. And that's just only 20% of them. So for me now, the discussion went from, okay, the program is working because training is happening, but hey, we're also keeping a close eye on gaps using data to find and close those gaps.
I think, Ilya, the other piece of that is not just looking at whether you've targeted the right audiences, but also thinking before you even conduct the training, what information would you need to be able to show that the training you did provide was effective? And in order to really answer those types of questions, whether a particular investment increased overall effectiveness of the program, you have to think about that at the design stage and the implementation stage. So when I'm thinking about rolling out a new training or a new tool or a new whatever it might be, what data would I need on the other side that could show a change, could show it was effective? So in the training context, sometimes that means you do, a month before the training, a very basic 5-question survey about some of the topics that you're going to cover. And you send that out as part of your announcement of, hey, you're going to have your annual whatever training coming up. And then you do a follow-up survey and you look at the delta. And of course, the follow-up survey can also gauge, other feedback about the trainings that can help you understand effectiveness. But if you plant some subject matter specific type questions before the training and after the training, then you can also see how it raised awareness. Or you can look at, if it's a speak up training, for example, look at speak up numbers in the 6 months before and the 6 months after the training, and think about what metrics and data will exist to show this particular investment was effective. And then you aggregate that across your program, and you end up covering a lot of your bases to be able to show your risks are well managed and the program is working effectively.
So smart. My gosh, that's great.
Let me ask a different question just about the guts of collecting data and analyzing it. So far, Haley and Elia, both of you have described exercises and goals and whatnot. It sounds to me like you can do this with Excel, because I do think that a lot of people fear, I don't have a good business intelligence tool. I don't have a lot of data scientists on the enterprise, or if we do, they're not going to bother with me. Their time is too stretched. And so I did want to devote some time today just to talk about the actual personnel and technology resources that either are necessary or that you maybe can get away with, or what you would need. Like, how hard is it to be able to pull off a lot of what we're talking about here? Elia, let me start with you, and then Haley, give me your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I'll just say one thing. Excel is great. I love working in Excel. It's actually what got me my first job in compliance. I'm a sociologist by background, so I was working on analyzing research data for a different function when compliance asked if I can help with the sort of ethics and integrity survey they were running. So basically, what that meant was crunching numbers in Excel. You can get a lot done in Excel, and I spoke about this delta between trained employees and all employees that I got through Excel. And the great part about that is that in time, people actually see the value in it. And in my case, it turned into a Power BI dashboard that aggregated all that data automatically in the background, and you could easily share that and look visually appealing. But I think the fact that you start with something that doesn't require a lot of resource from the company, and I think, yeah, whether you're compliance or sales, no one's going to give you like, you know, $1 trillion budget for the fanciest tool out there before you actually kind of prove what you can do and justify going to the next level.
Mm-hmm. And Haley, what's your experience been?
Yeah, I was going to say, so I'm a lawyer by background, and that is most definitely because I am certainly sublacking in the math skills and the statistics skills myself, right? But I have, using Excel and Power BI or Tableau, been able to build platforms that visualize meaningful data that, of course, you know, then require some human interpretation to be really meaningful, but that are those two platforms together. And most companies have access to the Microsoft Suite now, which is what they're a part of. You know, they are so user friendly that even someone like me can watch a couple of YouTube videos and figure out how to build these tools directly myself. So is it, you know, great if you have experts on your team, whether, you know, they're finance experts, really sophisticated with Excel, or, you know, maybe some sort of project manager expertise, sure. But I've been able to do it myself, at least in a way that it hits that 80%. And so I would definitely encourage people to start by leveraging the tools that are already available in-house, and just, you know, go out on the internet. One of the best pieces of advice that I got at the ACI conference last week was to, if you haven't started playing with ChatGPT just to see what it can do for you in your work, go out and do it. And this is like the perfect type of question to ask ChatGPT is, you know, can you show me how to build dashboards in Power BI that reflect external expenditure risk or risks in my supply chain? And you can easily get inspiration and see, you know, what else is already out there that people have been doing, and leverage it yourself.
I mean, I would take it a step further and utilize the advanced analytics plugin from ChatGPT, upload a data set. I mean, clean out whatever you want from there and ask it to define it, interpret it, draw some conclusions, and make some graphs. That's going to give you something to start to look at. And, you know, Haley made the point earlier of like, many of us are data rich, but we're information poor. I think we're like action, whatever's less than poor. I don't know. Like, we need to turn the data into information so that we can ultimately get the insights to take that action. And going back to what I was saying earlier, it's an iterative process. You're not just going to do data analytics and then, you know, put that on the shelf. It's an ongoing process to help guide us on our compliance journey to build a program that's actually going to be even more effective than whatever level of efficacy it's at right now. And so utilizing something like that to just say, okay, great, what are some things that I can start to investigate a little bit further, or use that as a primer to help, you know, prompt whatever, you know, resource in your company's network you're utilizing to help you with the analysis. That's a lot more effective, and that's a lot easier ask than dumping a, you know, 50,000 line code on some guy in some different department and saying, hey, analyze this. Drop that into ChatGPT and get a couple of conclusions that you then can confirm with this other resource, or, as Haley said, by spending, you know, an hour on some YouTube videos to see how you might cut that data and really confirm it for yourself before you take those ensuing actions.
You know, I wanted to put out, I guess, a poll to the audience, everybody who's listening here, just a quick yes or no, and pop your answer into the attendee chat. Like, how comfortable are you that you have the IT resources you need? If it's largely going to be Excel or some other business analytics intelligence tool like that, not the whiz bang stuff, but do you think that, you know, for the analytics you want, you have enough capability to get started, whether that's just Excel and somebody who's a pretty clever Excel analyst or not? Just yes or no. I'd be curious what people I want to say. And Haley, since you brought up the ACI FCPA conference last week, I wanted to know if you could give us your take on what they talked about with data analytics there, because I know The Assistant Attorney General made some remarks about analytics. I don't know if there were other points where analytics came up, but what was going on there? Nope. Haley, you might be on mute. Are you out there?
Sorry. Data analytics is discussed in sort of, all aspects of the program, kind of all aspects of the FCPA practice. I would say the two areas where I found the discussions were most interesting was first, the acting assistant attorney general did discuss how the department is increasingly developing its capability to identify potential cases in the FCPA space in particular using data analytics. So as part of the department's kind of broader look at all corporate financial crime together, as opposed to in sort of the siloed approach that I think has largely dominated enforcement over the last 20, 30 years, together with their increasing focus on corporate financial crime as a national security issue. Now they're leveraging data that they've collected for lots of reasons, SARS, from Treasury, whatever it might be. And they're starting to develop capabilities to make those data sets talk to each other and potentially bring cases before they might otherwise become aware of them. So I thought that was really interesting to see how the department's using data. Then on sort of the private sector side and the company side, I thought it was very interesting. There were a couple of CCO panels, and on one of them, the universal reaction from all of the CCOs on the panel is that they all felt that they had yet to see that data analytics actually adds any value. And I thought that was so interesting because as someone who's not yet at the CCO level, it made me feel like I need to up my game. Right? If I am not communicating effectively enough within my own kind of industry as to what I'm seeing and learning from the data, then there's probably no hope of ever bridging the gap over to the business, to helping the business see the value and the learnings that you can get from data analytics. So it showed me, I think, that we still have really far to go in this space, and there's a lot of capability there. But there's also, I think, a very low level of sort of saturation as to it from a maturity perspective in terms of how companies are actually leveraging data analytics in their program, despite the pushes and the frequent drumbeat from the DOJ that they expect everyone is doing this. If you have data analytics in your business, you should have data analytics in your compliance program.
Well, that's really interesting because I think it touches on an issue that I've noticed a lot when people talk about data analytics, that there is one school of thought. We talk about how data analytics can be used to assess the effectiveness of your compliance program, but we could also use data analytics to monitor your compliance risks. And that's not the same as just saying we have a whiz-bang compliance program. It's being able to use data analytics in a way that helps the compliance officer understand we have a big risk over here. Look at this business activity. And I don't know how often compliance officers are thinking in those terms. Haley, let me circle back to you and ask you that first. Like, is there something to that? And then Elia and Nick, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. Like, are we obsessing so much about the program we're forgetting to analyze and track risks out in the business?
I think it's a great question. And so I often think of when I'm looking at a data set that there's three potential questions that I could be answering using that one data set. And you really need to look at it from three perspectives. The first and the easiest is key performance indicators, right? So if you're looking at, data coming out of your gifts, travel, and entertainment compliance tool, right, and the number of cases that you're assessing and how quickly you're assessing them, right? That's one set of data analytics that might be indicative of health in your compliance program. You're also looking at key risk indicators. So when I actually look at the substantive information, what is the spend? Who are we spending with? How many exceptions are being escalated? That tells you about your risk. It also potentially tells you about the health of your program and your GTE policy, for example. When you look at the data that's coming through your tool, and then compare it to your actual GTE spend data in your general ledger, right? So what's the delta between what's coming into my tool and what I'm seeing in our in your travel and expense system and your PO system that corresponds to GTE spend and the gaps, right? And there you can say, oh, well, we're actually, only capturing 25% of our risk through our compliance GTE process. Is that appropriate? Does that reflect our risk appetite? Does it also reflect where the risks really are in the business? Are we getting all of our disclosures from one region and no disclosures from another?
Right.
And that can't be explained. So you really have to look at it at any piece of data from those three perspectives, and you can learn about the health of your program, the health of your compliance organization, and whether your risks are well managed.
All right.
I mean, all data analytic, all of this data analysis stuff, again, it's easy to get so lost in it, but you're really just looking at relative values. So again, if you had a whole list of all of your different regions and all those completion rates, you're probably going to see some clustering. Maybe 80% of those regions are all in like the mid to high 80s, and then you see a couple of regions that are extremely low. Well, obviously that's where we want to focus, right? So looking at those relative values to see how these different little populations that are aggregated together, like what those characteristics are and how those compare to each other, that's what can allow us to direct our efforts. Again, remember, data analysis, data analytics is a means to an end. It's not an end in and of itself. Our programs are not a means. Our programs are a means to an end, right? We want to improve our culture. We want to improve our risk profile. We want to get more engagement. We want to get more risk intelligence. That's the purpose of the program. It's not an end unto itself. Back to Matt's question from before.
And Elia, what do you think about all this and about how we can try to analyze the risks over time, not just how the program is performing?
Yeah, this got me thinking about a paper that I referenced in my dissertation at Fordham Law. I think it's a great resource. It's co-authored by Matt Galvin and Hu Chen, and it's called Driving Transparency in Corporate Compliance, a suggested approach for using technology to influence behavior. And the analogy that they make is, I can pop the link in the chat.
Please do, yeah.
The analogy that they make is that managing third-party risk, for example, is kind of like a bouncer at a club entry. Once the customer goes in, they'll never see the bouncer again unless something goes terribly wrong. I think that's the kind of energy that we need in compliance, but I think it's also just a great analogy and a great argument for performing ongoing due diligence. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that unless you find a way for that data to be updated, to have a certain frequency, and a one-time effort is not going to, a one-time effort isn't really data analytics. You want to be in a position where you can show a consistent approach to your compliance program, an approach that evolves in time and follows the progression of the risk that you're trying to mitigate as well.
Okay, so that actually leads me to another question that has been on my mind is, let's say the compliance officer is aware of some compliance risk. You build a good algorithm that analyzes some excellent company data to understand what your risk is. And that answers the question for you. But I am also thinking about the wisdom of then going back to the business unit, and they're the ones they're supposed to own the risk, say, here's this algorithm to let you monitor the risk. You take it, go forth and monitor yourself. I will be back next quarter or next year or whenever. But building these risk analytics tools for your compliance purposes, but then kind of turning them back over to the kids and say, here, you manage this risk yourself. How should we do that? Is that a wise idea? How practical is that? I'm wondering questions like that. Haley, what do you think of that?
I think it's a really great question, and it connects a couple of the more recent enhancements to the DOJ's guidance around compliance programs together, right? So the liberalization of the senior management commitment to capture all management, coupled with the focus on incentivizing management to own risk, couple that with data analytics and data, because the business needs to know and understand what the risk is in order to own it, right? If you want to make that handoff. in terms of how you actually do that, it's super hard, right? And it's a long journey because business people have day jobs, right? And even just having the nomenclature and being comfortable with the words around talking about risk can be a huge hurdle to overcome. So if I were starting this, sort of fresh new company, not happening, the first thing I would do would be to leverage your compliance governance boards or committees or sort of your oversight groups, and start by trialing these dashboards with those teams and engaging those teams in conversations around what you can learn about the risk by looking at these dashboards, and really take on their feedback and their input about, well, how this data point does or doesn't reflect risk, or how tweaking the data point in this way would make it much more relevant for them. And then I would really encourage you to leverage the built-in tools in Tableau or in Power BI, where you can insert pop-ups, little eyes or question marks that then very specifically give you an opportunity to explain the limits of the data,
So cool.
what conclusions can be drawn by the data, and let that sit with those organizations for a year, and then maybe start rolling it out at like the next level of leadership within the company. But really take it slow to make sure it's very fit for purpose, because it's a lot to ask your management to own that level of detail around the risk, and to be comfortable making decisions about it without some very heavy hand-holding by professionals.
Okay. The one idea that comes to my mind, the reason I brought this up, so we just had a very data analytics centric enforcement action here in the United States from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, where they sanctioned a large bank. Large banks are supposed to collect data, demographic data about applicants for home mortgages, and the applicant doesn't have to provide it. They could just say, I'm not interested. And the bank realized they were getting an awful lot of forms from their loan officers where applicant did not provide data. And they started to think that's weird, that we have a higher rate than our peer banks of that. And they built a really good analytics tool to figure this out. And then they started doing a monthly report on this high level of applicant did decline to provide. And lo and behold, the loan officers immediately said, oh crap, they're checking on this. We have to actually ask for the data now. And the high percentage went down, and that was great. And then the bank stopped the analytics control, turned it off, and lo and behold, the rate went back up. They found out they had a big problem with employees, loan officers collecting the data quality. And that's where I'm going with this, is that they use data analytics to answer a specific question, as opposed to using data analytics to monitor a state of affairs at your company over the long term, so you can notice when that state of affairs drifts into the red zone. I take all of your points, Hannah, that Haley, that this might not be easy to do, and maybe the business doesn't want to do it. Maybe they're busy, but how can we get to that greater state of observation and awareness? That's the question I'm trying to grapple with data analytics. I don't know, Elia, if you have any thoughts of that, or Nick, if you do as well.
Well, I was just going to say that I did 2 case studies on 2 large organizations that have successfully integrated their data analytics within the business. They've done it very, very differently. And I'm going to say what one was very transaction risk management focused, and the other one was embedding ethics into the organization. So very different approaches. The fact that they have successfully integrated that sort of approach within the business is an achievement in and of its own, but we must not kid ourselves that, once that was done, oh, well, this is it, and compliance can now just sit back and just monitor how things go. Each part of the business already has responsibilities, and compliance doesn't lead the business leads the business. So they'll be needing training, support, reminders to go back to whatever the tool that compliance has shared with them to kind of keep at it. I think it's just like a matter of business is never stagnant, and compliance has to just keep up the pace and continue to monitor new risks, reevaluate existing ones, and provide support where things go wrong.
Sure. Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, like, if we're just concerned with monitoring everything all the time, if like a risk pops up and we put something in place to confirm whether that risk is there, and then we do something to address it, I don't want to necessarily say that, like, well, anytime I've engaged in that kind of an activity, I must now turn on some kind of a monitoring mechanism to continue to monitor that risk. Again, going back to my, weight loss analogy, at some point, maybe when you step on a diet, you're going to be like tracking all of your calories. Well, after you do that for like a really long time and your habit has actually changed, well, you probably don't need to be in MyFitnessPal app all the time, because you already know kind of what the calories need to be, and you can kind of manage that sort of off app, so to speak. Mm-hmm. There's obviously like a different level of control there, because you're just one entity and you're controlling yourself and so forth. But I think what Elia said of going back and like reassessing risks and seeing if those are still present, and then having the ability to turn that monitoring on or off is totally appropriate. But sometimes just looking at a particular risk, assessing whether that's in place, you can put something, you can give some kind of a response to that can truly curtail that risk on an ongoing basis. I think we don't want to create some kind of an apparatus where we just have all of these, flashing lights, all these different notifications from all these different things that we're monitoring, where it ends up resulting in us just being, looking at some massive dashboard that doesn't end up kind of translating into action. To Haley's point from before, we have to get, information rich so we can be action rich. And yeah, I just think like periodically being able to like pick our head up, step out of the forest to see the, step away from the trees to see the whole forest, can allow us to reassess whether these monitoring things that we have in place are even necessary right now. Has our risk profile changed, or has our like organizational corporate habits changed? Or is it something that we want to, redouble our efforts on to really kind of root out that problem?
So I want to sneak in one last question that I think is really good here, that kind of raised by Jim Hawkins, one of our listeners, talking about how would you actually be sure that you're presenting your findings to the board, the CEO, whoever, in the right way, because either you go too deep and they tune out, or they might start quibbling with or diving too deep into the data themselves, and they're not paying attention to your bigger story that you're trying to convey.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice on how to make sure you strike that right balance when you're presenting some of the findings from your data analytics? Haley, I'll start with you, and then Elia. Oh, go ahead, Nick.
Are you sure? Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. My coffee's hitting. Okay. So I would always say be intentionally vague, stay super high level, but have that backup in case they want to go deep. The worst thing you want to do is lose your audience by getting into some minutia that's not resonating with them. So, I mean, we do this ourselves in our own board meetings or in our own investor presentations. We try to give folks the conclusion or tell them the problem or tell them the situation at a very high level with a couple of those big numbers. And then if that sparks their interest or they want to dive deeper, well, I have all the backup in the appendix, or I have all the backup in my mind, and I'm happy to speak to those things. I think what people tend to do is they tend to kind of go too deep, get into too much minutia, and they kind of sit back and hope, cross their fingers, hope that the data speaks for itself. That's never going to happen. It's our job to tell that story with the data and guide them through it. And if they have questions along the way, those are interaction points that allow us to ultimately drive more influence, because it's rooted in true engagement. You know what I mean?
Haley, what would you say? And then Elia, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I building on what Nick said, I would start with, what do we know and why do we know it? And both of those at the level of detail that Nick is talking about. The other piece underneath that, though, is, boards are very sophisticated and they will ask difficult, hard questions. Make sure that you do know the limits to why you know what you think you know, right? So be open and transparent about what the gaps might be. Make sure that you are comfortable with them. And maybe you do need to get into that level of detail, but you certainly don't start there. You start with, what do I know?
Yeah, and also,
how do I know it at a high level?
And also, just keep in mind that these sophisticated board members are just people, and they don't have that context that you have. So sometimes when they're asking a question that you might in the immediate moment feel like, oh my gosh, they're stumping me. Well, they could just be kind of feeling around in this concept to see like where the edges of it are. And you don't have to have all the answers. I think our first primary job is to convey a level of competence and, conscientiousness to where they feel good about us being in that seat. I don't think anybody expects everyone to have every single possible answer. So don't let the possibility that you might be asked something that you don't have the dialed in, to the decimal point answer for over anxietize you, right?
And Elia, what are your final thoughts here?
Well, if I have the honor to kind of give the last answer on this one, I think I'll use an analogy that Nick also referenced on gym and that sort of thing. You don't go to the gym on day one and expect to deadlift your own weight. So, but you kind of build up to it. So I would say, what is a small win that you can have today that's gonna it's gonna win brownie points with the board? And I think you have to be strategic about this one, because not everyone's backgrounds are the same. Not everyone's data analytics sort of vocabulary is the same. But I think if you can kind of categorize, we've introduced whatever it is that is working for you as data analytics for compliance, and be try and bucket things in, before we used to detect something and then intervene to remediate. Now we can detect something before it actually happens. So we can go and we can catch it before it happens. And the next level, now with this new tool, we can actually prevent it from happening in the first place. I think, in getting some patterns and outliers up there, that would resonate with the board, I think.
Well, that is all the time we have, but Haley Tuzeski from Cisco Systems and Elia Vasile from Japan Tobacco, this has been great. Thank you both very much. We learned a lot. And Nick, I don't know if you have any other closing words, but otherwise, thank you everybody for joining us.
I do. Yeah, guys, thank you so much. This was a phenomenal session. Round of applause for everybody on the panel. We broke 1,200 reactions. Anything over 1,000 makes my day, Also, for those of you loyal Ethicuties who are still here, there's over 200 of you still here. We are going to have one extra little prize here. And we're going to share this preview video of the Ethicsverse. We've been doing this for over a year now, and we've given away a ton of stuff. We really want to push this more into our community because we've gotten such positive feedback. We are going to be making a post on the Ethico LinkedIn page. And if you reshare that post, you'll be entered into a drawing for a separate 10 books, okay, from the Ethico library. So I'm going to share this. As this is getting pulled up, of course, if you have to leave, then you're out of the contest. Just kidding. So here is the video that Chase made. Welcome to the Ethicsverse. If you care about your company culture and improving your workplace, this is the place to be.
Than we ever have is always evolving. Two things I did.
Matt, look at that. You're on it. And remember, you're getting free CEUs for attending. And of course, we have our world famous book giveaway, and we're giving away 5 today. The Ethicsverse, the coolest place to be, every Thursday at noon Eastern. This is the coolest place to be. So thank you guys for coming. Matt, so glad you made the cover of that. You made the cover of the preview. This thing would not be what it is without you. Haley and Ilya, thank you guys so much for all of the insights you shared. And for all you Ethicuties out there, see you next Thursday at noon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.